Most people think strength shows up in the moment you fight back. They believe power is proven by the sharp comeback, the emotional defense, the need to explain yourself, or the urge to correct someone who is being unfair or toxic. But that idea of strength is immature. Real strength doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't rush to prove anything. It doesn't need to win every interaction. Strength is revealed in control, especially emotional control. Toxic people operate on a very predictable psychological pattern. They provoke, criticize, manipulate, or disrespect because they are looking for a reaction. Your reaction is not a side effect of their behavior, it is the goal. When you react emotionally, you give them exactly what they want: attention, validation, and a sense of influence over your internal state. The moment your mood changes because of them, they feel powerful. That's why arguing with a toxic person almost always feels draining. You're not having a conversation, you're feeding a system that thrives on chaos. This is where discipline enters the picture. Not reacting doesn't mean you didn't feel something. It means you noticed the emotion and chose not to let it control your behavior. That distinction matters. Emotional suppression is unhealthy, but emotional regulation is strength. Regulation means you pause, you breathe, you recognize what's happening internally and decide, consciously, whether this moment deserves your energy. Most of the time it doesn't. Philosophically, this idea has been around for thousands of years. The Stoics taught that the only true power we have is over our own responses. You cannot control what someone says, how they behave, or what they think of you, but you can control whether their behavior dictates your inner world. When you give someone the power to disturb your peace, you hand them authority over your life. Strength is taking that authority back. Psychologically, this works because attention reinforces behavior. When toxic people don't get reactions, their behavior loses momentum. Silence, calmness, and emotional neutrality disrupt their expectations. They expect defensiveness, they expect anger, they expect you to explain yourself. When none of that shows up, the dynamic shifts. Suddenly, they are talking into a void. And nothing unsettles a manipulative person more than losing emotional access to you. There's also a deeper layer here that most people miss. Reacting often comes from ego, not self-respect. The ego wants to be seen as right, understood, or validated. It pushes you to respond immediately, to prove your point, to defend your image. Self-respect, on the other hand, doesn't need to convince anyone. It's quiet. It's stable. It doesn't depend on external approval. When you stop reacting, you're not losing your voice. You're choosing not to waste it. Think about the strongest people you know. They are rarely the loudest in the room. They don't explain themselves to everyone. They don't argue with disrespect. Their presence alone sets the tone. That's because they have mastered themselves first, and self-mastery is always more impressive than dominance over others. Not reacting also protects your nervous system. Chronic exposure to toxic behavior keeps your body in a state of stress, elevated cortisol, mental fatigue, emotional exhaustion. Over time, this affects your clarity, confidence, and decision-making. When you choose control instead of reaction, you are choosing long-term strength over short-term satisfaction. You're choosing peace over drama, focus over distraction. This doesn't mean you tolerate disrespect or pretend everything is fine. Control doesn't equal passivity. It means you respond strategically instead of emotionally. Sometimes the strongest response is silence. Sometimes it's a brief, calm statement. Sometimes it's disengagement. But whatever the response is, it comes from intention, not impulse. And here's the truth most people don't want to hear. If someone can make you react easily, they can influence you easily. That's not an insult, it's an opportunity for growth. Emotional triggers are not weaknesses to be ashamed of. They are signals pointing to areas where you still have work to do. Every time you choose control, you strengthen that muscle. Over time, fewer things trigger you, not because you became numb, but because you became grounded. This is why non-reaction is not indifference, it's elevation. You're operating from a higher level of awareness. You see the behavior for what it is. You understand the pattern, and instead of stepping into it, you step back. That space you create between stimulus and response is where freedom lives. When you master this, something interesting happens. Toxic people begin to feel irrelevant. Their words lose weight. Their opinions lose impact. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You stop carrying emotional residue from interactions that never deserved your energy in the first place. That's when you realize strength isn't loud. It's calm, it's steady, it's controlled. So remember this, anyone can react. That requires no skill, no discipline, no awareness. But choosing control, especially when provoked, is a quiet form of power that changes everything. The moment you stop reacting is the moment you stop being controlled. Once you learn not to react, the next level of strength becomes unavoidable, deciding who gets access to you. Control protects your inner world, but boundaries protect your life. And this is where many people struggle, not because they don't understand boundaries intellectually, but because enforcing them feels uncomfortable, especially if you're empathetic, self-aware, or conditioned to keep the peace. But strength is not about being agreeable. It's about being aligned with your values, even when that alignment costs you connection. Toxic people don't respect explanations, they test limits. The more you explain your boundaries, the more material you give them to push back against. That's why the strong way forward is simple, calm, and firm. Boundaries don't require justification, they require consistency. When you set a boundary and enforce it without anger, guilt, or over-explaining, you communicate something powerful. Access to me is earned, not guaranteed. Psychologically, boundaries work because they redefine the relationship. They shift the power dynamic from emotional negotiation to personal standard. You're no longer asking to be treated well, you're deciding what you will and will not tolerate. That distinction is subtle but life-changing. People who rely on control or manipulation feel threatened by boundaries because boundaries expose their lack of power. They can no longer provoke a reaction or cross lines without consequence. Distance plays a critical role here, and it's often misunderstood. Distance is not cruelty, it's clarity. When someone consistently drains your energy, disrespects your values, or destabilizes your peace, proximity becomes self-betrayal. You don't need conflict to justify distance. Repeated patterns are justification enough. Strength is recognizing when someone has shown you who they are and believing them the first time. Philosophically, self-respect is the foundation of a meaningful life. You cannot build confidence, clarity, or peace on top of constant self-abandonment. Every time you allow toxic behavior to continue unchecked, you send yourself a message, my comfort matters less than their approval. Over time, that message erodes your sense of worth. Boundaries reverse that damage. Each boundary you enforce restores trust with yourself, and self-trust is the root of inner strength. One of the hardest truths to accept is that some people will not grow with you, not because you failed them, but because growth threatens their identity. When you raise your standards, you expose who was benefiting from the lack of them. This is why enforcing boundaries often comes with loss. People may withdraw, they may criticize you, they may accuse you of changing, but that reaction is information. It reveals who valued access to you more than respect for you. Strong people understand this and move forward anyway. They don't argue with misunderstanding. They don't chase closure. They don't try to be seen correctly by those committed to seeing them incorrectly. Distance becomes the answer when communication has failed. Not because you're avoiding the issue, but because you've already gathered enough evidence. There is also a quiet maturity in knowing when to walk away without burning the bridge. Strength doesn't need drama. It doesn't announce its departure. Sometimes the most powerful boundary is simply no longer showing up in the same way. Less availability, less engagement, less emotional investment, not as punishment, but as protection. This approach preserves your energy for what actually matters. When you stop trying to manage toxic people, you regain time, focus, and emotional capacity. That space allows healthier relationships to grow. And here's something rarely said out loud: peace feels unfamiliar at first. When you're used to chaos, calm can feel empty. But that emptiness is not loneliness. It's room. Room to rebuild, room to think clearly, room to choose better. Boundaries are not walls meant to isolate you from the world. They are filters. They let the right people in and keep the wrong dynamics out. The people meant to stay in your life will adjust. They won't demand explanations or guilt you into shrinking. They will respect your limits because respect is the price of closeness. And if someone disappears when you enforce a boundary, that absence is not a loss, it's confirmation. You didn't lose connection. You lost an obligation that was costing you your peace. Strength, in the end, is not about who you confront. It's about who you no longer have to. When you choose distance, enforce boundaries, and protect your self-respect, you stop negotiating your worth. And the moment you stop negotiating your worth is the moment your life begins to feel like it finally belongs to you.